You will not sleep under this roof tonight. Not tonight. Not ever again.
I have nowhere to go. David is upstairs. Let me speak to my husband.
David has nothing to say to you. We have spoken. It is finished. The Lord bless you and keep you.
David, please. Calm down. Just calm down. He is not coming. Stop embarrassing yourself.
I am carrying his child. I am carrying his child and you are doing this to me. Close the gate.
The rain had been falling for 2 hours before Blessing finally understood that no one was coming down those stairs. She stood outside the gate of the house she had called home for 3 years and felt the cold water move through her dress, past her skin, all the way into something deeper that she did not have a name for yet. Her feet were bare on the wet tar. Her belly was heavy with 7 months of life. And the gate in front of her was shut with the kind of finality that had nothing to do with iron or bolts. It had been shut by a decision, a family decision, the kind that gets made in a sitting room over hot tea, while the person being decided about is somewhere else in the house, not knowing that her life is being rearranged without her. Blessing had known for months that her mother-in-law Chioma did not want her. She had felt it in the way the woman looked at her food before eating it, as if searching for something wrong. She had felt it in the way David's sister Ombozi spoke to her, always one register too high, always with a smile that said something different from the words. She had known. But knowing a thing and surviving it are 2 separate journeys, and Blessing had spent 3 years believing that David was the bridge between them, that as long as David stood beside her, the rest could be managed. David did not come down the stairs. She waited. She counted. She told herself he was getting his shoes, getting his phone, telling his mother something that would end this. She stood in the rain with her hand on her belly, and she waited for the man she had married in a church in Victoria Island, with 40 people watching and a pastor who said the words that were supposed to mean forever. She waited until the upstairs light went off. Then she understood. She walked to her friend Sandra's apartment in Surulere. It took her 40 minutes in the rain, and the last 20 minutes her feet were hurting badly enough that she had to stop twice against a fence and breathe. Sandra opened the door at 11 at night and said nothing for a long moment. Then she pulled Blessing inside, sat her down, brought a towel and warm water, and did not ask a single question until Blessing had stopped shaking. That night, Blessing cried, until the crying became something else entirely. It became a kind of emptying. Everything she had carried, the hope, the effort, the meals she had cooked, the peace she had tried to keep, the times she had swallowed her own anger to protect David's relationship with his family, all of it poured out of her in that small room, while Sandra sat beside her and said nothing because there was nothing that words could do. By morning, the crying was finished, not because the pain was gone, but because Blessing had arrived somewhere on the other side of it. She sat up on Sandra's narrow bed, looked at her hands in the early grey light coming through the curtains, and made a decision so quiet it barely made a sound. She was not going to beg. She was not going to call David.
She was not going to wait for a family meeting, or a mediator, or an apology that might never come. She was going to build. She did not know what yet, but she was going to build. She had one skill that nobody in David's family had ever respected because it did not come with a certificate or a title. Blessing could cook. Not the ordinary kind of cooking that fills a stomach and gets forgotten. The kind that makes a person stop mid-bite and go quiet. The kind that carries memory and warmth and something almost spiritual in every pot. Her mother had taught her, her grandmother before that, and while David's family had always treated it as a small thing, a domestic thing, a background thing, Blessing had always known it was the most powerful thing she owned. She delivered her baby in a government hospital in Surulere 6 weeks later, a boy. She named him Emmanuel. She held him in the thin light of that hospital ward and told him without words that she was going to make sure his life was different from this room, different from this beginning, different from everything that had led to his arriving in the world without a father standing anywhere nearby. She told him with her hands and her eyes, and the way she held him against her chest, like he was the most valuable thing the world had ever produced, because he was. She started cooking from Sandra's doorstep 3 weeks after Emmanuel was born. Sandra had a neighbor, a woman named Helen, who sold provisions from a small shop at the end of the street. Helen mentioned to a few customers that a young woman was selling food from the compound entrance. The first day, Blessing sold 6 plates of jollof rice, 2 portions of egusi soup, and a full pot of pepper soup that a man bought entirely for a gathering he was hosting that evening. He came back the next day. He brought 2 other men. Word moved the way word moves in a Lagos neighborhood: fast, specific, and loyal. Within 2 months, Blessing had saved enough to rent a small corner space near Ojuelegba. It was barely a shop, more of a shed with ambition, but she cleaned it, painted it herself with money she did not comfortably have, hung a handwritten sign that said simply "Blessing's Kitchen," and opened on a Monday morning with 3 pots and a prayer. The first year was hard in ways she had not fully prepared for. Emmanuel was still small and needed her constantly. Money was tight enough that some weeks she chose between feeding herself and feeding him, and always chose him without thinking about it twice. There were nights she sat in that shed after closing and looked at her account and felt the fear move through her like cold water. There were mornings she woke at 4 to start cooking before the baby stirred. There were customers who cheated her, and suppliers who overcharged her, and days when everything went wrong at the same time. But she did not stop. She learned how to manage suppliers by watching other women in the market who had been doing it for decades. She learned how to price properly. She learned how to read which customers would become regulars and which were just passing through. She learned patience, not the passive kind, but the active kind that keeps moving while it waits. Emmanuel grew, the kitchen grew with him. By the time Emmanuel was 2 years old, Blessing had moved from Ojuelega to a proper restaurant space in Surulere. 12 tables, a proper kitchen, 2 staff members who she trained herself and paid on time every month without exception. The food remained the same recipes, the same quality, the same care in every pot. But the setting had changed, and with it, the kind of customers who came. Office workers, then their bosses, then their bosses' friends, then people who drove from other parts of Lagos because someone had told someone who had told someone else. By the time Emmanuel started primary school, Blessing's Kitchen had 2 locations, one in Surulere, one in Victoria Island. The Victoria Island location was the one that changed everything. It sat on a street where business lunches happened and deals were signed over food, and people paid without looking at the bill because the experience was worth whatever number appeared. It became the kind of place that Lagos society talked about, not because of advertising. Blessing could not yet afford the kind of advertising those conversations usually required, but because the food was that honest, that real, that extraordinary. A food critic wrote about it in a Lagos magazine. The piece ran with a photograph of the exterior and a headline that called it the most soulful restaurant in Victoria Island. Reservations began coming in 2 weeks ahead. David's family did not know who owned it. They could not have known. The name on the logo was simply BK, an abbreviation that meant nothing to anyone who did not already know the story. The staff did not discuss ownership with customers, and Choma, David's mother, was not the kind of woman who asked questions about things she considered beneath her until she needed something from them. What she needed was a venue. David's cousin was getting married. It was to be a large wedding, the kind the family had been planning for 8 months, the kind where the venue had to say something about who they were. Someone recommended BK Victoria Island. Chioma made the booking herself over the phone with the authority of a woman who expected to be accommodated. She spoke to the reservations manager, confirmed the date, confirmed the menu, and was told that the owner would be present personally to oversee the event. She thought nothing of it. Blessing received the booking report that evening in her office. She sat with it for a long time. She could have passed it to her manager. She could have arranged everything from afar,
at distance, and let the day pass without incident. Nobody would have known. The event would have happened, the family would have eaten and celebrated and left, and life would have continued. Blessing sat with that option and considered it honestly. Then she set it aside, not because she wanted a confrontation, not because she wanted to cause a scene or extract some dramatic revenge that people could talk about, but because she had worked for every table in that restaurant, every plate on those tables, every staff member in that kitchen, and she was not going to hide in her own house. She dressed on the morning of the wedding in a way she had not dressed in a long time. Not loudly, not to perform, simply with the quiet precision of a woman who knows exactly who she is and has nothing left to prove, and therefore proves everything. She arrived at the restaurant before the guests. She spoke to her staff, walked the floor, checked every detail. When the first cars began pulling into the compound, she was standing at the entrance to the main dining area with a calm that surprised even herself. Chioma walked in first. The older woman in her expensive lace and head tie moved through the entrance with the satisfaction of someone who had chosen well. She was mid-sentence to the woman beside her when she looked up and stopped. The silence between them lasted only a few seconds, but it contained years. Chioma's face moved through several things. Confusion first, then recognition, then something that was not quite shame, but lived in the same neighborhood. The woman beside her looked between them without understanding. The rest of the family filtered in behind, and the room shifted as they too began to understand what they were standing inside. Blessing spoke first, quietly, evenly. "Welcome. Everything is prepared. Your tables are ready." She did not say more than that. She did not need to. She turned and gestured to her head of service, who led the family to their section with the same courtesy extended to every guest in that building. Blessing moved through the event with complete professionalism, checking on the kitchen, greeting other tables, managing the floor, as if this were any other day. Because in the most important sense, it was. This was her restaurant. This was her ordinary Thursday. David came in late. He stood near the entrance for a moment before he saw her. When he did, something crossed his face that Blessing could not name and did not try to. He looked older. He looked like a man who had been living with something heavy for a long time and had learned to carry it by pretending it was not there. He looked at her like people look at a place they once left and cannot believe still exists without them. She nodded once, professionally. Then she continued her work. At some point during the reception, Ngozi, the sister who had told her to stop embarrassing herself on that rainy night, found her near the kitchen corridor. Ngozi opened her mouth twice before words came. "Blessing, I did not know this was your place."
Blessing looked at her calmly. "Enjoy the food," she said. "Tell me if anything needs adjusting." Then she walked back onto the floor. Chioma did not approach her directly, but as the family was leaving, after the food had been eaten and praised, after the evening had ended with the kind of satisfaction that her kitchen always produced, Blessing watched the older woman pause near the entrance and look back, just once. The look on her face was the most honest thing Blessing had ever seen from her. It was not apology. It was not quite regret. It was something heavier than both. The look of a person who finally understands the full weight of a door they once chose to shut. Emmanuel was 7 years old by then. He was at home with Sandra, who had become something between a sister and a family. He did not yet know the full story of the night his mother walked away from a closed gate in the rain, but Blessing had decided she would tell him one day. Not as a story of what was done to her, but as a story of what she did next, because that was the path that mattered. That was always the path that mattered. Outside on the Victoria Island street, the night was warm and clear. Blessing stood at the entrance of her restaurant after the last guest had left and looked at the sign above the door. BK. 2 letters that stood for everything she had built from a shed in Ojuelega and a borrowed pot and a belief so stubborn that it had refused to die even in the rain. She thought about the woman who had stood outside a closed gate 7 years ago with nothing but a soaked dress and a child she had not yet met. She thought about the walk to Surulere in the dark. She thought about Sandra's small room and the crying that eventually stopped. Then she turned off the entrance light, said good night to her last staff member, and drove home to her son. Was it her right to stay silent and simply let them eat at her table? Or should she have said more? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs it today. And drop a comment. We want to hear from you. God bless you.